For over 35 months, Russia has waged war on Ukraine, and today we look at the military situation there. I'm Julian Röpke, and this is BILD Situation Room. And we begin in the eastern Ukrainian region of Donetsk. There, south of the major city Pokrovsk, the Russian army has released a video that is supposed to show they are once again in possession of a contested village. But the video actually shows the opposite, and that's what we're looking at now. The video originates from Sribne. We will soon see the same thing on the map, and right here we see a flag waving proudly on the mine, specifically on the Sribne mine. It is situated in the far eastern part of this village, and we can see, as mentioned before, this flag right here. However, we don't see any soldiers. This means it's, on one hand, possible that this flag was actually left by a drone just to claim we're back in the village, and in that sense the Ukrainians don't have control over it. However, when we observe the camera zooming out, it becomes evident that we're not actually situated in the center, but rather at the extreme eastern edge. This implies that the Russians, otherwise they would show it, not in the center of the village, but that heavy fighting is ongoing here. Here you can briefly see the tower of the mine, the mountain, and here we now see the village ahead of us. Therefore, this entire area here, that's Sribne, which is still currently being heavily contested. We also see the fires in various places, and this clearly shows us that the Russians do not have full control of the village. Instead, they have, if anything, gained a foothold at the far eastern edge and are possibly trying to launch a counterattack on the village from there. That means the Russians' attempt here to show that they have regained control is failing quite spectacularly at this point, because they are currently demonstrating that they are not back in the center of Sribne. Let's take a closer look at the whole thing on the map. Our map provider, Deep State Map, still has Sribne marked in blue, which signifies that it is considered liberated or regained control by the Ukrainian army. This time, we're zooming in a bit more closely so we can get a clearer view of the situation. So here is Sribne, this small place about 2 kilometers away from Pokrovsk, the 65,000 inhabitant city that Ukraine wants to hold on to at any cost. The video footage that we've just recently had the chance to observe was captured in the extreme far eastern part of Sribne. So we observe that not much has really changed. We also see, with a closer look, that there was another attempt by Ukraine to reclaim the territory a few days ago. And it's evident that the fighting around Kotlin in this specific area here continues. This means the Ukrainians are absolutely determined to prevent the Russian army from advancing any closer to Pokrovsk, regardless of the cost. And why Ukraine is so successful here, as we can see in all the videos from the region, is because the Russians barely have any armored vehicles around Pokrovsk anymore, because the Ukrainians monitor the whole area with their kamikaze drones from all different directions so that they can target almost every armored, especially every heavily armored Russian vehicle, can destroy tanks or infantry fighting vehicles with their drones. And we have just received a brand new video of one of these destructions. And we are witnessing here a T-90M tank, known as the most advanced Russian battle tank, as it is being hit in the vicinity of Pokrovsk. From the Magyar unit, a very famous drone fighter in Ukraine, who often publishes lengthy analysis videos of his unit's attacks here. And we can observe this tank standing here, prepared once more in a forest clearing. We can see that on the left side is the field, on the right side is the field, and in between is this ridge of the forest where tanks often hide. And we can also observe that the tank is strategically positioned to most likely aim and fire westward now, targeting the subsequent Ukrainian unit. That a shell is loaded, we can tell from the immediate effect of the drone hit. And this drone has indeed successfully scored a direct hit. We're now observing the impact from behind. We are able to observe here how it simmers just a bit. And after a short moment, we witness one final shot being fired. And now the entire ammunition of this T-90M explodes. And what happens next? We naturally have to pixelate. But it's simply part of reality, because of course this T-90M has a 3-man crew, of which 2 probably died instantly, and just one, a single individual, managed to escape from that tank and is desperately trying to save himself while engulfed in flames. So he attempts to find some shelter in the nearby area. For the time being, he manages to survive it. We see or deduce, given the pixelation on the screen, that he manages to successfully put out the fire and then finds himself a hiding spot in the nearby forested area. However, that's also typical for the Ukrainian army. They don't give up now. They don't say, okay, well, we've got the tank, then let's let these people escape here. But since the Ukrainians know where he's hiding in the forest, namely here. Now we're seeing another approach of another Ukrainian kamikaze drone. Now we see them. I hope you can see it a little. Here it's quite visible. And now it's flying over to the specific location where the Russian was recently sighted. As the last remaining survivor of this crew, it then detonates in the forest here as well, effectively killing the very last driver of this tank. Yes, why is Ukraine doing this? On one hand, of course, all the tanks, as we just said, are being destroyed. This T-90M, often referred to as a breakthrough tank, is also part of the situation. The most advanced version to be mass-produced in Russia. However, it is of course also a a special skill to drive such tanks or to be a gunner here or something like that. And in this regard, Ukraine naturally has to ensure that this potential, specifically these capabilities, are also lost when these tanks are destroyed. Overall, we then find ourselves confronted with the fact or situation that we have practically observed almost no armored vehicles whatsoever around the Pokrovsk area anymore. In recent days, we've repeatedly shown how the Russians resort to using civilian vehicles instead. And we also want to take a look at one of these civilian or almost civilian vehicles. Those happen to be these buses right here, the smaller ones. It's not the original model, but rather a version registered over in Poland. But these Bukanka buses are actually one of the most used vehicles now for the logistical support of the Russian army around Pokrovsk and also in other areas. They are relatively robust, but they're not armored. And we see what happens from the perspective of a Russian soldier, giving us a first-hand look at the situation when they get hit. Initially, it caught fire from a Ukrainian drone strike, followed by a secondary explosion. It's likely not ammunition, but rather fuel that was struck here or was stored or intended for transportation. We can obviously see that the Russians are quite clearly helpless when they face Ukrainian drone attacks, especially in the areas around Pokrovsk as well as in other frontline positions. That's precisely why the current situation is such that the Russian army has stated, well, then we will just send in people. We will then proceed to deploy more infantry units forward in an effort to break through the Ukrainian lines. In areas where the Ukrainians are outnumbered, this particular tactic proves to be effective. That's why they've advanced so close to Pokrovsk. However, at the moment when the Ukrainians successfully manage to eliminate a significant part of the Russian infantry, in addition to the tanks, they have a certain relative advantage in situations involving close combat as well. And this scene, one of these benefit scenes we want to take a look at now, or actually exactly what I just mentioned, namely that on one hand we have the situation where that the Russians near the front hardly have any armored vehicles left, namely advancing only with infantry, but on the other hand, that the Ukrainians are still at a disadvantage, still in terms of manpower. And we can see that now in these shots from the small town of Sribne. And Sribne is a small place located halfway between Pokrovsk in the north and Andrivka in the south. We'll take a look at the map right away, and we can see that the place is barely destroyed. Of course, there are impact damages, but we can still see that some of the roofs and buildings still exist. And here we have the situation that in the center of the village, also typically near this monument or memorial to the so-called Great Patriotic War or World War II in the region, that we have now, as shown graphically by the Ukrainians, is that few Ukrainian soldiers are being fired upon from different sides in a building already fighting against an overwhelming number of Russians. Accordingly, Ukraine is now using a Bradley fighting vehicle supplied by the USA to free its own soldiers here. This means the rescue and evacuation chain is running well. We are closely observing how the Ukrainians are very precisely aiming and shooting from the Bradley vehicle, specifically targeting the backside of the building. It highlights great accuracy, firing past soldiers yet still precisely hitting the building. And shortly, a tactical smokescreen will be deployed in this area to ensure that the evacuation of our personnel can be carried out smoothly and effectively. Interestingly, now we can see right away the tank continues to fire. And now it fires to the right, which means towards the east. I think you can see it well now. So this is the direction where the shooting happens. That means we can be relatively sure that the Ukrainians were encircled, at least from two sides. Inside their building, there were Russian soldiers present, and further to the east, Russian soldiers were persistently advancing towards them. The Ukrainians, as mentioned, are trying to save their own people. Here we can see that 3 or 4 Ukrainian soldiers are being taken on board this Bradley fighting vehicle. And then it moves back, heading towards the west, effectively returning to its own controlled territory. So we see the situation I described before again. The Russians are superior, but they're no longer superior in terms of tanks and armored vehicles, because they've simply lost so many over the past days, weeks, and months. Let's take a look at the map again to better understand why this evacuation was able to succeed in this area. As I said, Sribne, a small place. Up there is Pokrovsk, that's a bit off the map now. Here is Andrivka and Sribne visible right here, and we saw it very clearly. The Ukrainian vehicle confidently moved into the center of the village, then turned around and skillfully made its way back out and to safeguard the soldiers from death or being taken captive here. And quite frequently, it's essentially the same situation if one falls into Russian captivity. They effectively succeeded in saving the Ukrainian soldiers from capture. We are still staying in the eastern part of Ukraine and aim to move a bit further northward into the Kharkiv region. Here we have obtained a new video from the Ukrainian army, which shows us that a fully loaded BM-21 Grad rocket launcher, so a Ural truck, which is loaded with 40 rockets that are either mounted on the back and ready to fire or set up for launching, is being targeted by another kamikaze drone. We must sincerely and candidly acknowledge that is another bullseye. That means even though the Russians sometimes only move at night and try to stay relatively far from the front lines, they are still very, very often and increasingly frequently, we see it here now, hit by Ukrainian kamikaze drones or even completely destroyed. I'll try to pause it once more quickly so you can see it properly. So here is the truck, the Ural. It's moving toward the left side in this scene. Shortly, we are going to witness the massive explosion resulting from the drone strike that occurred. And apparently, yes, we don't know if it was fully loaded, but they destroyed up to 40 Grad rockets, which actually have a range of 20 kilometers here. And consequently, absolutely nothing remains at all of the Russian truck or its crew members in this particular area. This means we see once again that when the Ukrainians have the opportunity, meaning they have visibility, that is, they've spied on their enemy using Mavic drones or similar, then they are indeed capable, whether it's a T-90M or a BM-21, to strike these Russian units here very effectively and hard. That not only the Ukrainians but also the Russian army can now handle their modern fiber optic threats very well, unfortunately shows us regrettably, but we must also show that the next images, and these come from the small town of Pisarivka. And Pisarivka is actually very far removed from the war activities, at least from the front lines in the east, specifically located in the Sumy region. However, this place happens to be just 10 kilometers away from the border with Russia, which isn't too far from where battles and confrontations are still ongoing in the Kursk area. You can clearly see here from the delta marking displayed on this truck that these units are very likely being actively deployed and utilized in the Kursk area for operations. And for not entirely understandable reasons, the Ukrainian army has parked its units relatively openly in Pisarivka, just 10 kilometers from the Russian border. They're simply stationed right here near a shop, which we managed to pinpoint, so a central supermarket in Pisarivka. They're just standing there, waiting, probably eating something inside or buying something before they have to head to Kursk. We're closely observing that these military units are now able to be very accurately targeted by advanced fiber optic drones, especially given that we are positioned just a mere 10 kilometers away from the border with Russia. This means that for the Russians, it's relatively easy to enter the woods with their fiber optic drones, which now have a range of 20, some even say 30 kilometers, but also to enter village centers and to attack the Ukrainian army here. We'll see further footage shortly, showing us that the Ukrainian army is spread all around Pisarivka, hiding in the forests here, at least their vehicles in the forests. But as the Russians have apparently spied all this out very well, and now with the fiber optic drones again, they are not susceptible to jammers of the Ukrainian army, that with their fiber optic drones, they can relatively precisely escape to the various vehicles here and tackle each one at a time. Here we see more vehicles, Ukrainians saving themselves at the last moment being attacked. It is clearly visible here that there is a massive jammer located on top, but it proves to be entirely useless, as you can see in this example. Even multiple setups, they're useless against these fiber optic directed drones. Yes, what specific steps is the Ukrainian army trying to take to combat these drones? There are many methods to shoot them down, but with such tiny FPV drones, it is extremely challenging. We already said earlier, all these disruptive actions don't work at all. So what exactly are the Ukrainians doing in response? They've been trying to develop ramming drones. And in this case, these are really drones that were specifically built to ram hostile Russian drones and then continue flying. We'll be observing that in the upcoming footage. It's a little shaky, but I hope you can clearly make it out. Here, a Russian drone is being attacked, and we then see the Ukrainian stabilizing and continuing to fly at this point. And we see that multiple times. There we see the crashed one. Here we see the next drone that was attacked, and we also see it's prepared for an attack on the Ukrainian army, probably quite nearby, so you can see it relatively well here. The explosive charge down here, the battery up here, and the quadcopter, which you can see around here. And this drone was also brought down, and subsequently this is a score for the Ukrainian tactic. We see this multiple times. Here we have the next one, another drone. You can even pretty much identify the make of the Russian army being attacked. And then the Ukrainian drone continues flying after its ramming attack, as we see here, and can even film the crash. Here's another last-second rescue, if you will. You can clearly see the RPG-7 warhead below and the blue battery of the Russian drone above. And this drone is also now rammed, falls down, explodes. I even think, yeah, it explodes on the ground. And the small Ukrainian FPV drone, yes indeed, somehow managed to stay airborne here and continue to fly around without any difficulty whatsoever. And accordingly survived this attack and can then even be used multiple times. We were just in Sumy, and now let's head over to Kursk. The heavy fighting continues unabated there as well, and Russia persistently tries, more and more frequently or repeatedly, to advance their position with intense airstrikes. And we see here, near the border, which are under Ukrainian control, and over here on the left, this significant work, this expansive structure, is said to be a vodka distillery, which is apparently located in Kyiv. This particular location is also well known for that. It has currently been attacked by Russian FAB-500 bombs. We can see they are hitting very precisely here. That means, once again, at least those we can see, the impacts are very precise. We are now seeing more impacts exactly on the same building. That means it's a large, massive building, which is of course being used and utilized by the Ukrainians to entrench themselves, to actually have protection, at least from tanks and the like. However, those large FAB 500 bombs, which weigh roughly half a ton when being dropped by Su-34 or other aircraft, indeed have quite a relatively strong and significant impact in this vicinity. And presumably, if Ukrainians were present inside, it indeed resulted in losses for the Ukrainian army. All in all, the situation in Kursk remains almost unchanged. We see small Russian advances, in this case in the western part. We mentioned it yesterday, the Russians are making significant progress here at Svertlikovo. However, the front line in the area around Malaya, Loknya and Sucha, both crucial locations for Ukraine, is still firmly fixed and unchanged. And what we have just observed, the attack on Guevo is located approximately here, signifying another nearby village. What the Russians have not been able to achieve on the ground so far, and what they consequently have to bomb from a distance using airstrikes. Finally, let's take a look at some breaking news in a video from Germany. As BILD exclusively reported this morning, the German company Helsing is delivering 6,000 AI-operated kamikaze drones to Ukraine. Kamikaze drones of the HX2 type, these are indeed the latest kamikaze drones even worldwide, and they are now being produced in series immediately. It was only newly introduced in November of the previous year, and as we reported today, Ukraine is anticipated to receive a total of 6,000 units from Germany once all the necessary financing has been completely secured. There's already a preliminary contract, or the Ukrainians have exercised the option. The necessity was officially recognized and confirmed by the BMVG. However, the final financing will likely only occur under the new government. The HX2 has a range of 100 kilometers. Here we see it in flight, as mentioned, over southern Germany, where the company is also based. It's 220 kilometers per hour fast, weighs only 12 kilos, so it's lightweight, and what's special about it is the software inside, because you can actually see this drone, as we can already see, deploy even under extremely bad weather conditions. It is carefully guided by AI technology to reach the target after being efficiently launched from a sort of mechanical catapult. This drone offers the possibility to program everything in advance. That means you tell her beforehand, you're flying over this village, and then you go there and finally make the target approach on a tank or a barracks. You can inform her of everything in advance, and she carries it out autonomously, if you will. What's notable is that she employs a technique similar to the German Taurus missile, for example. That means it compares internally stored maps with its surroundings, making it resistant to GPS jamming and other signal interference, which are very common occurrences in the eastern regions of Ukraine. Resistant to such tactics, it continues to be usable even if the Russians attempt jamming. That these 6,000 drones are being delivered now is no coincidence. Helsing has already announced the contract for the predecessor drone or an alternative drone called HF1. A few months ago, 4,000 are set for delivery. The BMVG states 900 are already in Ukraine. And they are apparently so successful that the Ukrainian army has said, we want more drones like that from Germany. And according to our information, these will indeed be delivered to Ukraine starting from March and continuing until the end of the year. This implies that Ukraine has the capability to target up to 6,000 locations significantly behind the front lines and accurately destroy them with the aid of artificial intelligence.